when you get frame flex, is your RV pretty much totaled at that point, or can it be fixed in certain situations?
So in most cases, it can be fixed. That's the good news.
Who even know where these rivers flow, or why the wind chooses when and where to blow? The sun is gonna rise.
Hi, everyone. I am Keith Ward with RV Travel. And joining me right now, I am super excited to have Dustin Simpson on with California RV Specialist. Dustin, welcome to the channel.
Hey, thanks, Keith.
Okay, so today we are talking about a topic that's getting a little bit of coverage in the industry these days. You can't go anywhere almost in the RV space on the internet and not hear people talking about it. And that is frame flex and this frame flex controversy. So we're going to dive right in on this. I want to start by setting the table first, though, and having you tell us about your background in RV repair. So you're with California RV Specialists. Tell us what that company does and any experience you have with frame flex in your business.
Okay, so like Keith said, my name is Dustin, and I own and operate California RV Specialist out of Lodi, California. I've been in the industry for about 25 years. So as you can imagine, I've seen anything you can think of come and go. I don't want to get too extensive on my background because it's pretty long, but I've ran multiple departments, dealerships, my own business for 20 years almost. And so I've seen, every level of owning a business. Imagine what you come across, right? So from in this concern, a warranty side, I can walk you through all the different realms of that. But I've got a huge background, architecture and engineering background, building inspection background. I come from a family that was all in the construction and trades. And so that kind of led me into RVing. So every time we weren't working, we were out RVing. And that kind of became my passion and got myself into that.
In other words, it's in your blood, isn't it?
In my blood, yeah.
Without a doubt. So how much experience have you had dealing with frame flex issues in the past?
So frame flex, even though it's kind of like a new topic and that it's out in the media per se, that's something that I've seen throughout my whole career. It's kind of more exposed itself because of the social media, but it's been around for years. I mean, we've had it on everything from a fifth wheel to a travel trailer. And I would say on average, before this has gone more public, I guess you would say, I would say we would see it a couple times a year, 2, maybe 3 times a year. We've seen it and repaired quite a few over the years, and there's a number of reasons that it can happen.
So let's one of the things I always like to do up top is kind of define our terms. So we're talking about the same thing, frame flex.
Yep.
A lot of people are saying it's not frame flex, it's frame failure. So from your experience, Dustin, how would you define this issue?
So frame flex that we currently know it as, it's basically what we're seeing more often is we're seeing the, cab of the bed of the pickup truck versus the fifth wheel hitch. And they're talking about the fifth wheel body to the legs of it flexing down the road. So usually the tattletales on it, which I think we'll probably get into in a minute here, but to just define that is basically the framing is flexing and bending in a distance that it shouldn't be. So they should all have some flex to them, but not excessive flex.
So that's the thing, right? I mean, it seems like every frame that's attached to something like a pickup truck is going to flex by its nature, right? You're driving down the road. So this is obviously a much more serious situation. Does frame flex to you mean a failure? In other words, when you get frame flex, is your RV pretty much totaled at that point, or can it be fixed in certain situations?
So in most cases, it can be fixed. That's the good news. The only type that I've seen that have not been able to be fixed, and again, this is a real rare, is when that front frame detaches from the actual body of the upper deck. Then it becomes, obviously an accident or a catastrophic damage. So they are, for the most part, completely fixable. It's just identifying them and catching them before it gets to that point.
How often in your experience, Dustin, has that happened? Do people typically see it before it becomes catastrophic? I mean, is it that noticeable, I guess is another way to put that.
Um,
Would you know it would you feel it, for instance, if you're driving that truck or if you're a passenger in that truck? Is that something you might notice?
it depends on the level, I think, of the owners. So, if you've previously towed a fifth wheel, if this is your second or third purchase, I have a video clip somewhere that I had at one time a consumer had sent to me that basically said, "Hey, it feels funny when I'm towing it." Well, in the back when they were recording it, the whole box was
Mm.
jostling around and actually hitting on the pin box itself. So, I mean, you can feel the difference. In some scenarios, I've had owners have like a leaf spring break. So let's say that pin box was broken or breaking loose. It's now creating more of a bouncing rhythm on the frames, that's what's ultimately causing it to flex. Well, I've had some that have had like a front leaf spring break and not know why that one leaf spring broke. It's because the weight of the whole coach is now shifting forward in that direction.
When someone comes to you with a frame flex issue, is it typically a long and expensive repair? I don't know if you can generalize about this or not, but is it going to be a really big deal all the time, or if you catch it early enough, can it be something that's a less expensive, not quite as time-consuming repair?
So just to keep it kind of generic, it is going to be very expensive. There's a bunch of different factors that come into play. And, I was saying earlier that we have a video on one that we recently discovered that was here on the lot. So whenever units come into our lot, whether it be a travel trailer or fifth wheel, we are looking for what we call pin blocks rise. And that's a tattletale of a frame flex issue. So as far as the expense factor of it can be, it all depends on how the unit itself was put together. Sometimes you're going to have to take off the front caps. Some of them are going to take off the under nose. Some of them you can access through side compartment doors. But there's a lot more factors that come into place if they have like one or two slide outs above that deck that may have to come out or be, that are load bearing on that in order to get in there to do your repairs. So I had a unit a while back. I'm not able to go into a ton of details on it because it's still in the middle of a lawsuit. But in order for us to get in there and inspect it, it was a big, 40-foot plus fifth wheel. They actually had a front kitchen with a front dinette with dual slide outs. Everything had to be removed. Even the flooring had to be removed. So we had to completely have almost to the point of what you started with, like a blank foundation to get into it, to see the extent of the damages.
Okay.
So sometimes, it's a complete tear down in that upper area. And sometimes it's, you can access it and, get to it pretty easy. It just depends.
So you've been talking about fifth wheels a lot, and but you mentioned earlier also you've seen it with travel trailers. So I was
Mhm.
wondering, is it more likely to happen in a fifth wheel and something that's a huge, heavy load, or can this pretty much happen with any size of trailer or fifth wheel that you have?
So again, predominantly we see it in bigger fifth wheels, just because of the span of it and the weight of it. And of course, we're not camping anymore; we're glamping, so we got everything you can imagine in there, right? But it can happen to any size of fifth wheel if the right circumstances come into play. And as we get later on into the segment, I'll talk about like different things that can cause that. But just keep in mind the basics. How do we drive? The roads we drive. are we overloading it? So a lot of it comes back to, consumer education as well. Do the manufacturers make mistakes? Absolutely. Do the frame factories make mistakes? Absolutely. So it's kind of a broad, it's a little bit of everything involved. Even as something simple as a tire blowout, or hey, I took this road a little bit too hard and went off into the ditch a little bit. Any of those factors can cause that happen.
Okay. So an important takeaway here, I think, is that the heavier your RV is, the more aware you have to be. But it doesn't mean that if your towable isn't as heavy, that it won't happen,
Yes.
depending
Yes.
on the circumstances. So keep that in mind. That's really good, Dustin.
And
Now,
even
we
for a travel
go ahead.
trailer, I'm sorry, even
No,
for a
go ahead.
travel trailer, it's the same thing. The longer the travel trailer, the longer the span. So again, it all comes back to, towing and how we tow it, and of course the build of the coach. But there's a big maintenance factor involved too on both of those, and we'll get into that more too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now, for better or worse, Grand Design is the company that's been under the microscope
Yeah,
here. And as I mentioned in a previous video, which I will link to, I talked with a Grand Design employee at an RV show who kind of blamed a cranky YouTuber for kind of starting this whole thing. Now, is is the flack that Grand Design taken on this, is that fair in your opinion, Dustin? In other words, can it affect, it sounds like you're saying it can affect any manufacturer. And so should Grand Design be taking all the hits they're taking, or is this groundswell of complaints about Grand Design justified in your opinion?
so I think absolutely that it this is going to affect everyone. I think I do a lot of Grand Design repair, and I happen to have a Grand Design RV Owners Facebook group. It's Grand Design RV Owners. What's in the shop with Dustin?
I bet that's
And
very active these
it's
days
it's
too.
a very active group. We have 17,500 plus members in that group, and I'll come back to that because there's a reasons why I started that. We used to do Grand Design warranty, and you can also see YouTube videos of why we stopped. Um, but as far as all your main manufacturers that are out there, Forest River, Keystone, Grand Design, any top brand that's out there, I think the reason that Grand Design is getting more hits on this is because they're I guess you'd say their crowd is a younger RVing crowd. They're more into the YouTube, they're more into the social media, and even Grand Design itself. They connect to people a lot of different ways through YouTube and through social media. So anytime I hear of a rally, it's always a Grand Design rally. So that the getting it out there, and that type of, I don't know if you'd say clientele or age or just the vibe of, hey, showing you everything, they are out there quite a bit more than a lot of the others. And so I think that's where when they have an issue or a complaint, it's put out there. Even I've done that as well. I've came up with something new and posted it, and then got a chain reaction of, oh, does that affect mine too? So
So would you be willing to at least wonder if there is some sort of a design flaw in some Grand Design fifth wheels that may lead to
yeah.
this? I mean, I don't know if you have any sense of that.
So I think I've seen it across the board with every manufacturer. So it's keep in mind that every single year they're building a new coach. It's a new model. They're all, in my opinion, they're all like a guinea pig. It's all trial and error. It's what works this year, what didn't work last year. And so, when those frames are being built, it'd be like, Keith, if you called me and said, hey, I want a frame. Okay, well, how long, how wide, how high, what are you going to put on it? And then I build that for you. Now, keep in mind that, hey, who we're talking about here, but, obviously Lippert, right? I have seen and been involved in different suits where I've found multiple issues on one frame. And so, Is there quality control catching everything? It depends on, the people that are welding it, the materials they're using. It all based off of what Grand Design is ordering too.
Let's move on to some to ways to prevent this if possible. So, are there tips that you have for ways to avoid having this frame flex happen to you in the first place? So, is there any preventive maintenance that you can do? What do you think that an RV owner can and should be doing to minimize the chance of this happening?
So to minimize it, I think again, it's a long number of topics, but I think it needs to start right out of the gate with educating the RV owner. When it goes to the frame flex issue, there's so many things that we see as a repair shop that can, in result, cause that damage. So I'm trying not to get off track, but like there was a whole controversy about Swintech side outs, right?
Right.
Well, we're seeing all these side outs breaking, but they're not breaking in a motorhome because the motorhome has a better suspension than a fifth wheel or travel trailer. So one thing I would suggest and recommend is the suspension that's on these coaches is generally the cheapest suspension out there. Some basic springs. I joke around, I call it 1950 technology, but there are other suspension upgrades that the end user can do to make it better, which reduces 60 to 70% of the jarring and shaking and vibration. Same as the braking systems too. So there's braking systems that are designed to operate better to slow the vehicle down. Another item would be the pin boxes. So a lot of the fifth wheels that are being released just have a generic, I'm going to call it again 1950 pin box. It's just a metal steel box. There's no dampeners in place. There's no slides in place. There's nothing to prevent all that jarring and shaking. And then, it comes to the vehicle, do they have the right vehicle to tow that huge fifth wheel, or even a small fifth wheel? So is the vehicle underrated for the load that they're carrying? Is it kind of, it's good enough, it's borderline? Have they looked into adding any sumo springs or Firestone airbags or anything to kind of help support it, or any leaf spring enhancements to help beef it up? Again, we're trying to stop, the bouncing and the shaking of that cab.
So you spend some money now to potentially save a lot later, right?
Oh yeah. Same thing with your fifth wheels, having the right brand, so you're talking about the right brand of truck or load carrying capacity, the right fifth wheel with the right pin box, with this huge trailer with the right suspension. And if any one of those components isn't right, it's going to cause a problem. As well as, again, going back to the consumer and to do some training. What if, I'll give you two scenarios, it's a young guy, just got left with some money, just went and bought a brand new, 1 ton and big 40-footer toy hauler. How is he driving that? Is he driving it like it's a 4-wheel drive off-road vehicle and just goes off of curbs and, brakes hard, accelerates hard? Or is it,
donuts in the parking lot with the RV, right?
Overloading it, so, and is it that, I have one where it was again, it come back to it. It's a lawsuit, but the guy was having problems with his leveling jacks and they kept bending and breaking the frame and stuff. Well, he's an old truck driver. He'd put it in gear and bam, slam that thing in and to lock it in like he would his truck. And when he had accelerated, he'd accelerate hard. And when he braked hard, and, and it just caused damage. Right. So there's a lot of, that comes into play. Weight comes into play. We're throwing a lot of stuff in our pickup truck and then connect, so now we're re-overloading the truck, or maybe we've, put too much, we've added a generator where there wasn't a generator. We've added additional batteries up front. We've added, we've stuffed that compartment full as we can get it. So I've seen every scenario, not just, whether you were on, I call it the fence, right? And the manufacturer is doing something wrong and the frame manufacturer is doing something wrong and it's leaning boards against that fence and causing it to tip
Right.
to, which is going to break, right?
I think that last one is a really great point too, Dustin. So, if it's been a while since you've weighed your RV,
Yeah,
take it to a weigh station. Chances are
absolutely.
very high that it has changed and likely gotten heavier, isn't it?
I've had different frame manufacturer companies come in for training, or suspension companies come in for training to our facility, and have literally walked around the yard and just pointed coaches out. That one's overweight. That one's overweight. That one's overweight. And when we would ask them, they'd say, just look at it. Look at the way it's setting. Look at what they've built inside of it. So, an issue that I see that I've seen on almost, I don't know, without over exaggerating, 70% of the Grand Design units that come into our shop, the springs are flat. They're overweighted. I mean, I have two on my,
70%.
at what I see.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
I mean, if I went and took a live feed camera and walked outside today and went from unit to unit to unit, I've had, now here's real life scenarios. We had a consumer come in with a reflection and his tires were wearing funny. And I looked out my window and I just seen it wasn't setting right. When I went outside with that owner, on the front axle, it had 3 leaf springs. On the back axle, it had 4. So imagine it's doing this,
Yeah,
right? It took 47 emails between me to Grand Design and to Dexter Axle to say, hey, and springs are dirt cheap. Hey, somebody put this on wrong. Well, right away the axle manufacturer says, well, hey, we didn't add those springs and suspension to that. The axle company or the frame manufacturer says, we didn't put the suspension on that coach. That stuff's all bought a la carte and added to the unit after the fact. So it's like that was a Grand Design issue.
right.
And then getting the companies to work back and forth to just simply pay for a few $100s of material and a few hours labor, it was like pulling teeth.
Yeah. And that's when it can really become a nightmare for the customer. The
Yeah.
finger of blame,
Yeah.
right, starts getting passed around, and it's your
And
fault. No, it's your fault. Like that Spider-Man meme, right, where they're all pointing at each other. Yeah.
And
So
exactly, they asked, oh, and this gentleman happened to be in
yeah,
his late 70s, and it was like, oh, well, maybe he had a tire blowout, maybe the springs were bad, and maybe this, or maybe he overloaded it and changed the back ones, or we wouldn't have let that gone out that way. Everything was original, and he only owned it for 2 months.
2 months. That's
2
that's
months. So not only is when it was built at the manufacturer, that was on there from the very beginning level of production when it was a blank frame.
RVers like checklists, and they're
Mhm.
a very good thing to have before you leave for a trip, when you come back for a trip. Would you put checking for frame flex on a checklist? Is that something that you think would be a
Absolutely.
good idea?
Absolutely. So I want you to think of, if it's a fifth wheel, we're already in the mindset of checking the tires, plugging it in, making sure that it's connected properly, raising our jack legs up. We're going through that whole process of, doing the walk around, do any of the tires look flat? Are all my brake lights and turn signals working? That should be another indicator right off the gate. Whenever you disconnect and reconnect that pin box, you could even take and mark the side of it with a piece of chalk. So here's your pin box, and you have the house over it, and the pin box is sticking down. You could mark that with a piece of tape. You could mark that with some chalk. And as you connect the unit to it and you're taking the weight off of the legs and now onto the truck, you can watch to see how much rise that has. And anytime you're driving behind it, I mean, you're pulling it, you can always look in that mirror and see if that box is moving around. If it's jumping around or moving too hard, something's not right. And it
And you
doesn't
shouldn't wait,
necessarily, yeah. And
right? If that happens, I mean, any little bit of squirreliness, I would think, is a sign that you should take it in to see a specialist, an RV repair shop like yours, right away. Would you agree?
oh, right away. And it's not, there's so many different areas on those front noses that can break. It can break at the back at the actual deck itself. It can break up front on the main I-beams. We've even recently seen changes that, where Lippert's come out and they've redesigned the front nose to help compensate for the load bearing and the weight. So there's, there's a bunch of different areas that stuff can break loose from. It's not just, hey, it's this spot every time. In the video that we just recently did in the repairs, it was actually the front I-beam instead of like in the back of the deck, and the I-beam actually broke and tore a hairline crack. And once we undid the under nose, we could see the backside of that I-beam, and we could see one crack on one side. But until we removed the front cap, we couldn't see that both sides were broken on the opposite side, because it's a box too.
Right. Wow.
So they're not always, like we were saying earlier in this, they're not always accessible unless you really tear into them.
Must have been a pretty scary moment when you find a crack on the other side too, and think what could have happened.
Oh my gosh!
Fortunately, didn't.
The owner, he came in here to do a roof coating, and I think it was off of one of our videos, and he, was reading about that, and he came in, and that's all he was doing, and that's, in lieu of replacing a roof membrane, and so that itself is pretty expensive. When I called him after we were pulling the unit out of the bay, and my employees found that, it was, we right away stopped, started taking measurements, started confirming, and then had to contact him and have him come down and see it. He felt that there was something wrong, but it was fairly new to him. He'd only had it like 6 to 8 months. And, he also had a new truck, and he got this new used trailer. And so he couldn't tell a difference. He said, it just tows different. Well, now he knows why. And luckily it was at the point, Keith, where it could have completely ripped loose. Basically the whole head mechanism of the pin would have broke off, and that trailer would have just smashed into him, killed him, or killed somebody else.
Yeah. That is scary. So we probably scared a number of people in this conversation, and that's not really a bad thing.
Yeah.
I don't think so. If someone is concerned that they have frame flex, what do you recommend they do as the very next step?
So regardless of your manufacturer, regardless of the year of the unit, please don't be afraid to contact the frame company. Sometimes the manufacturers in our industry come and go, or there's certain lines, like the example would be Tiffin Van Lee. There'll be different ones that'll dissolve or merge or whatever. Don't be afraid of getting hold of any of the parties involved, but make sure you check with both of them. So if you feel like you have this frame flex issue, even if you're out of the warranty, and a lot of times the frames are underneath a 5-year warranty, but again, reach out to those companies, because let's say it's 7, 8 years old, 10 years old. There could still be an ongoing problem that hasn't been corrected or rectified, that nobody's aware of because of miscommunication. People, like you said, people may be paying for stuff out of pocket, getting these repairs done. The insurance may be involved, and they, something led the insurance company to go ahead and cover it. And so all those places are not communicating back. But if you have that problem, make sure you find a shop that is familiar with how to identify it, how to repair it. You can always call the manufacturers of the frame companies and see if they can defer you to a shop that's familiar with it, or even the same thing, the manufacturers, they'll know if somebody now, is capable of doing it. And you'll find this out there. They're far and few in between. It's just not something that's that common enough. We're talking a really small percentage of folks that have this. And again, it can happen from any of those different reasons that we talked about.
So if someone has let's say you're someone who's got a 10-year-old fifth wheel, never experienced any symptoms, any signs of frame flex, would there be any value in just taking it into a shop anyway and saying, hey, just look this over, check for that, simply because of the age of the unit?
Yes. So another one that we had in the past was a gentleman had a front cap leak at the roof line, and he had the side moldings, which is real common. Well, water made its way throughout the frame and caused damages to we'll call it the side plates that hold up the walls, as well as, again, the pin box. It compromised it. So when we were removing stuff to make repairs, we noticed a substantial amount of rust and water damage. As we went to replace those areas, that's again when we found, rust is deterioration of the metal. So if the unit's getting compromised and it's eating away, it's going to cause an issue. So it doesn't matter the year, make, or model. If you think that there's an issue, get it inspected as soon as possible. Be careful of there's different charts and stuff that even Lippert has available that I'm sure they'll send to the consumer. I think most of them are now out in the public, but there's certain things that you can check to kind of identify if you have that problem that anybody can do.
It calls to mind the old saying, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." When you're talking about something as huge and potentially dangerous as frame flex, the more prevention and the more proactive you can be before an issue starts to occur, the better you're going to be. So, last question for you, Dustin. This has been so much fun to do, so much that I have learned. It's just been so eye-opening for me. But you've been in this business a really long time, and when it comes to frame flex, are there any more advice, any words of wisdom that you have for the viewers today?
I just want you to know that I don't want you to panic and think that this is, oh great, now it's every unit that's out there, it's every manufacturer. That's not the seed I'm planting. I don't want anybody to think that they're not safe. This is happening again. It hasn't we'll say come to light or enough information out there, but so I don't want anybody to think that they're not safe. I want you to know that everybody does care in our industry. Recently I had a conversation with Jason Lippert, and it was something completely different. It was in regard to an awning situation. And when he called, one of the things I talked to him about was some of these frame issues. And, he had the same concerns that I have, safety first, right? So it wasn't, and not to, pat him on the back or his company, but, they're huge in our industry. And so there's things that I do like about them, and there's things that I don't like about them. But he is, his willingness to listen and to call me was phenomenal. I mean, for him to say, "Hey, here's some of my time," when we talked about the frame issues, he basically was expressing, he was more so frustrated. He was like, we have teams that go around, they inspect the things that are being built in all the different manufacturing levels. And he went on, and I learned a lot of details. I mean, it was like you said, mind blowing, all the different stuff. It was like, wow, okay, I think that's good. But, my example would be, they're, whether it be Lippert or a different brand, they're building those frames again. They're not free of defect. There's going to be problems. There's going to be employee issues. There's going to be inspection issues. Even if they built a perfectly good frame, that frame still has to be loaded up and transported, which is usually they're stacked up. If you see the pictures online, there's 4, 5, 6 on top of each other, stacked up on a railroad car, delivered to a manufacturer. Then they're unloaded on there and they're offloaded on there. So at that point, if there's any damage that happens between those two scenarios, and then we go into the manufacturer side of it, whether they've modified the design or it's a custom build or they're changing something, the owner wants the refrigerator on this slide out instead of that slide out, whatever the scenario is, because Grand Design does do a lot of customization, for people, and there's special one-offs. So depending upon the build and if they're catching or if they're adding anything additional, any design changes at all can affect all of this. And then we've got to come back to the roads, watch your driving, watch your roads, look and think deeply about the time that, me and Keith are taking to make this video. We're trying to prevent anything from happening. So check into all the different, accessories, look at your suspension, look at your hitches, look at your trucks. You need to be just as equally careful as everybody else. This is a community or RV, whether it be a repair shop community or a manufacturing community, The last thing that anybody wants is somebody not to go home at night or to lose a family member. So we need to take
We
care of
all
it.
have to do our part too.
We all have to do our
It
part.
may not be the manufacturer, it may not be the frame maker at all. It may be you
It
as
may
the
be you.
RV owner who's not paying attention, who's abusing the RV, who is overweighting it, and all of these things,
and,
right?
and not know it.
Right.
Just not out know it. That's why I was talking about education. Just simply that they could be abusing it and not knowing it.
Right.
And then when these big companies, when they shut down and they don't offer information or their urgency, the old thing was that your emergency is not my urgency. Well, if you're not living in the unit full time, if you're living in it full time, that's, hey, the ball needs to get rolling. You can't wait. But if you are not living in it full time, take the time to properly have somebody look at it. It's going to take, this process is a deep process. There's a lot of investigation that's got to go through it, from laser leveling, checking the frame to make sure it's not something else that's causing it. There's all kinds of details in there. If you are, if you've stayed through to this whole video and you've watching the tail end of this, I encourage you not to, if you're going to go and do your wheel bearing pack or your tire replacement, suspension work, I encourage you as a consumer, not to say anything bad about anybody else's business, but your local tire shops, your big box stores, like we'll say Les Schwab, they're not educated to check the units as a RV repair company or dealership would be. So to give you the example, you go in for a wheel bearing pack at a Les Schwab, they're going to jack it up, they're going to take the tires off, they're going to throw the wheel bearings, grease them, lube them, put them back together and out the door, right? On to the next customer, right? The difference on our shop is when we do a wheel bearing pack, we're actually charging you to inspect the frame, the brakes, the U-bolts, the springs, the shackle links, the hangers, the I-beams. We're looking at everything from your breakaway switch to your 7-way cord to your tail lights, anything involved with that thing rolling down the road. And then any inside information that we're going to have that those other shops wouldn't have because we are somewhat connected in the industry. So there are recalls and bulletins and stuff that come out through these various companies. And so it's just something that I wanted to let you know out there.
Expertise matters.
Expertise
matters, and the details matter that you were just going over there. And again, like you said, you have relationships with a lot of these manufacturers. You can get answers perhaps that the other folks just don't have access to.
Sometimes it takes you a few days, but it's out there.
Yeah.
And then lastly, communication in our industry. I'm a younger owner. I've been in this industry now for 25 years. I'm approaching 50 years old. I cannot explain or express enough. Like I was saying, I started a Facebook group for Grand Design. And one of the reasons I did that was so that I could take pictures from my shop and put those into folder albums so that I would have stuff to refer to in case we've seen the same model, the same unit. So keep in mind that if one unit typically has a problem, they all have that same problem. So on that frame flex issue, if you know somebody that has a specific year, make, model, and that information comes out to light, double check yours because it may very well have it. So that was one of the reasons why I started that Grand Design RV Owners What's in the Shop with Dustin, was so I could keep track of what issues we're having, as well as getting data from RV owners that have Grand Designs and other brands to post them there. So that if I have a unit come into my shop and I call Grand Design and I say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. And when I was doing warranty for them, Keith, imagine you're building the coach. You don't know what's going on with the coach. The only way you have feedback is from those repair shops. So if I call you up and I say, hey, it's doing X, where do you want me to start? Most of the time, they don't know. And they'll say, well, you figured it out and you let us know. And that's not helpful. We don't want to go spin our wheels and waste our time looking for a problem if you already have the answer. So again, the whole communication back and forth, this industry in general, it needs some love, you know.
It's good that there's caring people like you out there that really do want to help too. So once again, Dustin, I want to thank you for your expertise, for sharing your thoughts with us today on an issue that is of great concern to everyone in our industry. Thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah. Travel safe, everybody, and we're here to help you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for
Dustin
watching.
Simpson, California RV specialist, folks. It was just a delight. Have a great day, Dustin.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.